and welcome to the Burn Network. Welcome to Positive Fandom. I am your host, RM, tonight with Julian. Julian, how are you?
I'm doing great, RM. It's great to be here. It's great to be talking about this wonderful show with you.
Yes, absolutely, Julian. You and I are here for our second review, the season 2 review of a show that is just so incredibly good. It's called For All Mankind, and certainly it's a show. It's very hard to do these short reviews of a season that really does have so many amazing things happening in it, Julian. But I'm so grateful when you agree to review the shows, these seasons 1, 2, and 3 with me. We're doing season 2. We did season 1 last week, and it was an incredible review for an incredible show. And I hope anybody who is watching right now or watching this on the replay will go ahead and give For All Mankind a chance. Go ahead and watch season 1. Go ahead and watch season 2. You can always watch our review at any time and just enjoy the show, because this is really a spectacular show. It's made with love. You can tell the effort that's been put into it to make it special for everybody. If you like science fiction, if you like the space program, if you like politics, certainly if you like the idea of revisionist historical events, then For All Mankind is for you. I know, Julian, that when it first came out, and we've heard other shows use For All Mankind as a title, but this certainly is such a very innovative and fun show to watch. You and I had a great time reviewing season 1, Julian. Certainly it was just a phenomenal season, and I feel the same way about season 2. How about you?
Yes, it just builds up. It starts going forward from an area that we never got, where we have two countries on the moon at this point, doing their stuff with the tensions that are building between, the nations. And it's kind of showing itself in the way that we're behaving on the moon as well, and you just want to say, come on, we got to work together, people. But the way the story's going, it's just not going to happen that way. We also have the ladies of the space program are at the end of the last season were making their impact with the Apollo missions, and I think now we're going to be dealing with how we're going to have the ladies and men on the moon a lot more together, and how that's going to play into things. So it's really good.
It really is, Julian, and I couldn't have said that any better. And of course, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, guys, I do want to mention, first of all, hello to Tom Jr. Jackson, our moderator, collaborator, and good friend. We are all goof people. Tom Jr. Jackson is the moderator tonight, and hello to you, Tom. Hope you are well. Certainly always great to see you here. And thank you for always doing everything you can to help us with the shows, from the thumbnails to pretty much ideas. And we appreciate you, Tom. Also wanted to mention that Julian and I are reviewing the first 3 episodes of For All Mankind. As I mentioned before, we did review the first season of For All Mankind last week, and you can watch it right here on the Burn Network. You can also watch it on Positive Fandom. We're doing season 2 tonight, and next week on Friday, we'll be reviewing season 3. So please do check those reviews out and let us know what your favorite scenes and experiences of the seasons are. For those of you who are in the chat, please do share your things that you love and that you noticed about the show, or anything that you want to share in the chat. We do appreciate you being here. And certainly, Julian, you made such a great point about this particular season, because this is the season that I think is very interesting, because there seemed to be this in the season 1. It seemed like there was this fight over who was going to be the first at being on the moon, who was going to be the first woman, who was going to, there was a lot of these firsts that either side, let's say the Russians and the Americans, wanted to have that claim. But this season, it feels as if there's a fight over, it's more of a territorial fight that happens. And it's kind of extraordinary. There's at one point, it feels as if the let's say the United States has a stake, and then the next thing you know, someone else is there, and how do you respond to that? And I think the picture that we have here, that you can see of the show with what I've never seen, because we've never seen it before, let's say in this, especially in the space program, although I'm sure they did have some kind of weapons to defend themselves, but let's say aeronautical marines. I don't know what you call them.
Space Marines.
Space Marines, which is yes, it is true that they are Space Marines. And thank you, Tom. Yes, do also check out my YouTube channel, Positive Fandom. I am streaming the show on Positive Fandom right now as well. And also check out Tom Jr. Jackson's YouTube channel. He has wonderful reviews. I just watched a review of his for Prey. It's a fantastic film and a fantastic review, Tom. So please do check that out. Now, I think it is really interesting, Julian, that was, of course, seeing that you do realize that there's a reason why there are weapons in hand. They're not playing paintball, are they, Julian?
No. If I remember correctly, I believe so. The crater that the American group has been working at, they are trying to reach the ice that they are pretty sure is there, and they're hoping to find a large amount of this ice, because if they can find something that can be used as water, then that solves some of the fuel problems for moon trips, and it makes it easier, a little bit more economical to send stuff up there. So they're trying to get this, and we start finding evidence that the Russians are trying to. They've been snooping around in our area, and then I think there's even an incident with flags swapping, where they plant their flag and then we take it back, and so that the Pentagon, they decide, well, we're sending up some Marines, and we're sending up some weapons, and you're like, nothing good can come from this. Nothing good at all.
Yeah, it really was something that I wasn't expecting. Certainly, we know that there was going to be conflict, but I wasn't expecting conflict that would result in Marines being sent onto the moon. And that's exactly what happens in that regard. It is quite a sobering thing, because, and I think somewhat ironic, because all of this time, Julian, it feels like the scientists have been resisting the Department of Defense's desire to put any kind of weapon on the moon. And this, not only are they putting, let's say, for our practical purposes, weapon, but Marines on the moon. It does have a different feel to it, in the sense of, who's there. And I think I was able to pull up, I think this might be them. I managed to grab a photo. I think this is the group of Marines who end up on the moon. And you can see they got a patch there. It looks like a Marine, right? Is it Semper Fi or something like that, Julian?
Good. Yeah, I can't see it very well here.
It right. Okay, I clicked on the wrong share. Here we go. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's the Marine patch, the Semper Fidelis.
Yeah, and certainly they do have a different tone and add something different to the show, Julian. But I think it is very interesting, the dynamic that's created, certainly on what's happened to Jamestown, even in general. Julian, are you amazed at how cool and how regular it is for, this space program to have this permanent location where it feels like anything is possible on the moon?
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Yes, they've expanded out of the original Jamestown module, and they're still incorporating it, but yes, they still have it, and it's grown quite considerably, and I thought that was really neat. That was one of the cool things. One wishes that we would have something up there by this point in time in our real world, and we don't, and that's sad. One of the other things I think is very interesting about this season is that at the same, because they're trying to find ways to work without to work the space programs without aggravating political tensions is that at some point they decide that they're going to do Apollo Soyuz mission, which in this reality, because the Russians were there first, is that they decide they have to call it Soyuz Apollo. So this ends up bringing over a bunch of Russians eventually from their space program to work on trying to figure out how to make the docking module that they will use for that mission. And this is one that's really important to Margot, as something to show that the two countries can work together in peace. So it is also at this time that we start seeing that the Russians are starting to kind of put some pressure on to try and get information from her. They start kind of playing her for information with her counterpart from the Russian delegation. And that's going to become very important later on in the series. But I did like that they put in these things that we know from our history that play alongside of this new reality for them of having an established long-term mission on the moon. And what are we doing up there? What can we do up there? And let's just try and work together. Unfortunately, there's just too much tension for that to just go status quo.
Yeah, and I'm just going to pull up a picture because much of the show, there is so much in the show, and it is, we can't share everything in one review. But this is, of course, the base, a picture of the base. Yeah. And it looks incredibly realistic. And certainly it's built up quite a bit since Gordo and Poole and Baldwin were there. It's practically like a different town. It's grown. I guess it's been maybe 13 years or so, Julian, 10 or 13 years or so since the original 3 astronauts were there. And it was a rough stay for them. Certainly, they didn't have any amenities really, and all they had were each other. However, even despite their flaws, and I think that each other's strengths and weaknesses balanced out the group. And certainly Baldwin, I feel, should have never been left there on his own. But he's a grown up. He can survive, but that's it almost felt like he was scraping by in a sense. And certainly now you can see these transitions or the impact and the investment they've put in to have a regular crew. They have people coming and going. They have, what is it called? Like a deployment, and they're there for, I can't remember how long they're in this incredible new environment. And they have scientists, they have chemists, they have biologists, they have geologists. And, of course, as we mentioned, eventually they're going to have space Marines as well. But Julian, you make such a good point about this sense of how, they're here, they're on the moon. And the last thing that they were expecting to see was this challenge of the mining site, Julian, to wake up in the morning. They think everything's fine, only to find that someone else wants to make a claim to it. Now, we are going to talk more about that because I do have some questions to throw your way about this. It seemed as if when we start off this season, it was really amazing how, here we are watching this and they are in complete darkness. Now, it's because of the phase of the moon and where Jamestown is located. They were in the dark, and now they were going to start to experience this incredible sunrise. And I love this beautiful reference that they had, Julian, with Bob Marley's song "Every Little Thing," which so many of us know. It's such an important and fun, reggae song from that era, where everybody is watching the sunrise, and it really, signals this new beginning, doesn't it, Julian?
Yeah, I didn't know what the heck was going on at first, you know, and then you see, so you have a bunch of them who have actual missions, and they're getting ready to go off and do their stuff, but there's a large group of the astronauts that are free and go off to this line where they all stand in a line and they're waiting for the sun to come up over the horizon because it hasn't hit that area in you know a while. So it's this new thing for an awful lot of them who haven't been up there that long. So yeah, it's a very this whole line of astronauts. They got their shields down and everything so that they're not blinded by the sun. But here it comes over, you know, so that they can. They're like this special, you know, type of meeting for them all to stand there and wait for the sun to come up.
Yeah, it was really mesmerizing, and I do have a photo. It's just taking me a little bit longer to bring it up, but and Julian, we talked about the quality of what we were seeing, and certainly they haven't let us down in season 2. We're still getting this incredible quality, this crispness, and we're going to see here when we look at this picture, it's just absolutely phenomenal. The beautiful shadows, the beautiful you know, silhouettes of the astronauts. It's just spectacular, and it's exactly what we're hoping for. Let's say if a bunch of us were on the moon walking out, even the walking, it kind of, you know, it's got that bouncy feel to it, and I'm actually just enjoying watching some of just the ordinary machinations of what's going on. So certainly this was interesting. At the same time, Molly and Wobo are on the surface as well. They are currently doing what you were talking about, Julian. She's mapping, since she had discovered that amount, you know, water, ice on the moon, if you will. And Wobo is working with her. But we also have another really amazing thing too, Julian, is that, as you had mentioned, Margot starts off and she's asking her assistant, she wants to say, she goes, okay, go around the world or around whatever. And what she's referring to are all these other groups of space, I guess you could call machines or whatever, that are being operated by NASA, including this, you know, I guess, which would be like an International Space Station. They call it Skylab, I think. I wrote it down. And
yeah, Skylab was up at, you know, that's what we had. Skylab was up in the 70s.
Right. And they also have, I think they have another one, and Pathfinder. I could be getting them all wrong, but
Yeah.
what I liked about it, Julian, was that there was this organized and very specific, mission specific operations and missions that I loved. Certainly it made sense. They had an orbiter going around, but they also had the moon base. They also have other, you know, rockets that provide, you know, fuel or whatever they need in Jamestown. It was really remarkable to see this. And of course, satellites, which are very familiar to us because we know there's a bazillion of them going around the earth right now. But I was quite impressed with the rundown as she was reading it off to her. I was equally impressed with how Baldwin, who happens to be in charge of the astronaut assignments, has his, you know, board where he has all the names and all the locations, and the ASCANs, who are sort of the astronauts in training. It really was great to kind of see that and kind of be in the thick of the operations, knowing what's going on. I think Margot is living her, you know, like her dreams right now. This is exactly where she wants to be. But Julian, as you said, boy, Margot's whole world is going to be shaken.
Yes. She's put so much of herself into her work. That is her core being. That is who she is. And she has not really allowed herself much of a social life for herself. And we get a look at that where she's still spending an awful lot of time kind of living in her office, you know, oftentimes, where she's got a place where she stays there overnight if she needs to, right? So she's given her all to be where she is and to do what she's doing. And I think that's left her a little open, a little vulnerable when she meets her Russian counterpart, who comes over to work on with them for the joint mission, and he sees that and is able to kind of take advantage of that eventually. Never really can tell if he actually was interested in her or if it was just something going on, that he was just playing her. But I think this, right before with the sunrise and everything, isn't this right before they have that issue with the cosmic rays coming, the solar flare? I think it is.
It's 100% true. I mean, just when it seems like everything is working like clockwork, just when I think there's this little bit of sense of ease, they have three major events, and of course the solar flare, or this proton radiation incident. They have this quite disruptive competition with the Russians, and then of course Margot, who's in charge of the program, has her world turned upside down, and it has some severe consequences in so many ways. Some that are quite obvious and apparent, and others that are, quite understated. As you said, Julian, who would have guessed she really does become a target for manipulation, and certainly of people who are in these high, these sort of executive positions in an organization like this can fall to this. And it is unfortunate because she certainly doesn't deserve this. This is, not anything that I think I would have guessed would have happened to her, but it is something to be aware of. And they needed to do something, I think, with this character. She chooses not to have a social relationship with anyone, but all of a sudden she's having this relationship with this Russian person who kind of says to her at a meeting, well, are you going to be at, diplomat meeting, space something?
Oh yes, this annual, meeting of this space. I can't remember what it was called, but yeah, everybody who's involved with astronomy and all that kind of stuff, with the space programs. So.
Yeah, and anybody who's anybody is going to be there. So of course she's thinking, yeah, I gotta make sure I'm here again, or I'm present during that. And they do definitely take advantage of her. I think it was important to show it, and certainly I think that Margot, although it doesn't look like it, I think as soon as she realizes what's happening, I think she has a plan, Julian. At least I hope she has a plan, Julian. I hope. So it is very interesting to see this. And Julian, you did mention that even after this incredible, and let me just go back, you were talking about how there's this planned meetup that we want to have, the Americans want to have with the Russians, and it's going to be this really beautiful thing, right, Julian? Where it's supposed to be a meeting of two nations, and it's going to change everything. And certainly it does sound spectacular. It sounds amazing. But in order to do that, Margot does have to have this sort of relationship with him. And that's kind of opens up the door, doesn't it?
Yeah. She realizes that from the first, when the Russians come in, they're being very standoffish. And neither side wants to, both sides are afraid to give away anything that could supposedly be used by the other side. And so it's very tense. And she finally is able to figure out how to build it, to force a crack through that wall of stubbornness from both sides, as far as not wanting to work together. Some, of course, there's even the political talk that this is just, it's like, we're gonna say that we want to do it, and we're gonna move like we're gonna do it, but it's not gonna happen in the end, and we're just gonna look better for it for trying, and because it's gonna be their fault that it'll fall apart, type of a thing. And of course, the Russians are probably thinking the same thing. We'll look good, and so it's this game of one-upsmanship on both sides, and she's like, "This is bullshit. We need to work together," and figures out how to try and kind of work with. I can't remember the guy's name, the character's name.
I don't remember it either. However, he ends up being somebody that she has a kind of a connection with. Even after she does this presentation with the Russians being there, they build a sort of module that they have to go through in order to have the handshake, moment that is incredibly important, for this part. And I think it's really interesting because they don't have compatible units. And so somehow it becomes an engineering problem that Margot and Alita and this man end up working on. So it was very interesting. It does kind of bring you closer together when you work on a project like that, something that would have such a profound effect over people's perceptions of peace. I thought that was incredibly important to show how things can look. Sometimes when things look at their worst, things can turn around. Maybe even now things will turn around. Who knows out there? So we always have to have some hope that there will be, some way to find an agreement and, somehow get to a point where there's this detente or a stalemate or something. But it was very interesting, Julian. You had mentioned another thing that happened, this solar flare. I'm just trying to find a picture of it. I don't know why I can't find it or anything like that. This solar flare that happened. So right when the astronauts are enjoying this incredible view, and certainly one of the ladies who I think we see in the picture on the left-hand side, she is one of the astronauts who happens to be up there at that moment.
She was in command, I think. Yeah, she was in command.
Yeah, and while she's up there, one of the other, it might be the people in Skylab or whatever the name of it is, while they're up there, they notice an anomaly. My computer's not responding. They notice an anomaly. And it's a solar anomaly, I guess you would call it, or we could call it that for all practical purposes. But on like this one was like a level of a solar anomaly they have never witnessed in like the history of mankind, I guess.
and it caught them unawares also. So by the time it was going to hit the moon, it was a shorter amount of warning time than they thought that they would usually have in these things. So suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, how did we miss this? This is an emergency. And so there's the whole call, and it's like everybody's got to get undercover now. And Molly and Wobo, yeah, there they are, all sprinting off, just like, oh man.
So no sooner had they come to welcome the sun, here comes the sun, and they're like, oh no, here comes the sun, for real, we got to get out of here.
Yeah.
They really don't have any time, do they, Julian? This is less than 30 minutes. Oh my goodness. I don't think I could really even move that quickly. And they hustle. I guess they're not that far away from Jamestown. They make it in there. A good portion of the astronauts out there make it back to Jamestown, and they have a place where they hunker down to protect themselves. And it is impressive to see them all do this. But there are, I think the orbiter goes to an area where they're not going to get hurt by the radiation, maybe on the other side of the moon. I don't remember what the thing, or maybe they go lower in the atmosphere or whatever it was. But there are two astronauts who are kind of caught out there. And certainly this is the worst case scenario. Nobody wanted to see anybody caught out there, but unfortunately they were. And that, of course, is Molly, who we remember from the first season. She's out mapping part of the moon, and she's out there with another astronaut by the name of Wobo, or at least that's his nickname. And they're told that if they can't get back to Jamestown, that they have to shelter in place. Now, my goodness, the only place that they could find a shelter was an old lava tube. And it really, to be honest with you, it really wasn't very much of a good shelter at all. They're really very exposed. Julian, what did you think of that scene?
Well, I think it seemed like they were exposed, but Molly was pretty certain that under cover of that cave they would be okay. The problem is, Bobo's not going to get there in time. He's taking too long, and when she goes to, it's obvious that he has had an issue. What did he do? He like flipped the
rover,
lamp,
yeah.
the rover that he was using, and so he's injured. There's no way he's going to get there in time, and so he's going to be exposed for the full time that he's out there, through this storm, which is going to cause massive radiation damage to anybody who's out in it.
So, and it is just heartbreaking, Julian.
Yeah. So yes, the decision he makes is heroic, and it's foolhardy at the same time. I don't know. It's one of those. That's a tough decision, but the decision is she's going to go out there and try and bring him back.
Yeah, and Julian, I think we've seen a lot of actions that do speak louder than words in the show, where people are doing things that are incredibly heroic, incredibly dangerous, and they're not doing it for their own purposes. They're doing it for someone else. And it was impressive to see what she did, not only finding him using the terrestrial scope, but then going out in what is considered really harmful radiation. What did you think of the effects on the moon, Julian, for the radiation storm, if you will?
It was effective. I don't know if that's really how it would look, but it was effective in the way that it portrays that it was almost like these solid drops hitting the surface and bringing up these poofs of moon dust as these packets of radiation or photons are smacking into the surface. And so whether that's what it would be like or in reality, I don't know, but it certainly was effective for getting across the idea that this is basically like running out in the rain to try and get there and get back without hitting any of the drops, and then you can't do it, right? You think, the faster I go, I'll miss more, and others say the faster you go, the more you're going to get, right? So it's just she knew if he stayed out there in the full exposure, he was probably going to be dead sooner than later. So she went out and pulled him to relative safety. And I think what was worse was once they survive, she lies about it.
Yeah, and there is that. Of course, later on we find out that Baldwin doesn't believe her. He knows that she's been heavily exposed, and in fact, I think he can tell just by looking at her. And I think that shows very interesting observational skills as a commander. I don't even know what his title is anymore, but let's just say as the head of the astronaut program and making decisions about who does what. He knows that there is definitely something off about Molly, and he calls her out. And he says, "Look, I know you, Molly. I know you wouldn't ever leave a single person up there, and I know you went out there and saved him." And she's like, "What are you saying? You think I would lie?" And he goes, and he's not so concerned about that. He's actually just really concerned about her welfare. Wibbo would have died, Julian.
Yeah.
And it looked scary what she ran out into. I wish I could get a thing of it, but I know that would get pulled down. But I think that this was an act that was unbelievable. Certainly, we find out, this whole thing seems to happen pretty much at the same time. Like after she takes Wibbo in and they get back to Jamestown. Unfortunately, Ellen, I think that's her name, um, says that Molly can't stay in space because she's been exposed too much. And I think Molly thought that if the badge said it was green, she'd be fine. But, that really was not necessarily the case. It's just like an indicator or a possible indicator. But it was interesting that Molly ends up being sent back to Earth. She goes back with Ellen. And, of course, this is, Molly is going to be grounded for a while. I think she has to stay there for 6 months, a year. What did you think about the notion of the fact that, and I don't know if I can exactly put this way, but as they were talking about everything that happened, I noticed that there was a news report that we got to see, and I didn't address the news reports, although I wanted to. What I wanted to say was that in the beginning episode, the first episode, they usually tell you what the state of affairs are in the world. And we see some alternate things that have happened. Certain people that had not survived that time period were now alive, and some that didn't survive in in reality did survive in this alternate reality. So I noticed that they also had, they could have had anything in the show, Julian. They could have had anything, but they decided to have a clip of Run DMC in that preview. And I thought that was very interesting. I thought to myself, well, obviously the person who created this is a rap fan. Like, they love Run DMC. And I'm like, why would they decide to include that? I thought that was very interesting because I guess they felt that needed to be in there culturally. A lot of shots of Ronald Reagan, who in this reality wins a second term. And also, I don't know if you saw this, and I'm sure you did see it. There's an Enterprise cast member. We do learn that they were going to name a ship Enterprise after the Star Trek show. They said that in the beginning. And in one of the episodes, Linda Park, who was in Enterprise, is there as a reporter. And I think she was a communications reporter for the Enterprise series, for Star Trek. So I recognized her right away. Did you see her, Julian? Did you see?
Yes, yeah, she was doing the news stuff, wasn't she? I remember it took me a moment to realize who it was. I was like, oh, there's Linda Park.
Yes, and it was great to see her doing that. And I said she was handpicked for that. We all know that whoever put her in there was for a reason. And certainly that would be the second homage, let's say, even just in that episode or so far. I'm sure there are other Easter eggs to Star Trek, but they very specifically said that they named the new ship Enterprise after the television series Star Trek, and that kind of felt really good to hear them say something like that. But what I also thought was very interesting is when Ellen, takes this job, she's sort of she's an executive now. She feels she's going to have more impact on the ground with the program than in space. Her partner and her agree that the way to Mars isn't through Houston, it's through Washington, Julian. And, I thought that was very clever, very interesting. I couldn't have guessed where her career would go, but she certainly does soar pretty fast, doesn't she, Julian?
She does indeed, yes. After all her time and stuff, she decided, I'm done with space. And sets herself up for playing the political game very, very adroitly. It was a very interesting way for them to play that, especially going down the political road that she goes, and given her, particular story, you might say.
So I'm just going to say it, that she's in the closet. Let's put it that way.
Well, yes, there's definitely that.
And she is also in the closet. She has a partner, a male partner, who is also in the closet.
Yeah.
And the political climate of the time, they're doing this for a number of reasons. So, that's their choice. We're not necessarily, commenting on how we feel about it. It's more just of what's in the story. And she is a fantastic astronaut. She seems to be good at everything. Ellen seems to be good at everything. She's a good negotiator. She's a good astronaut. She gets along well with a lot of the people in either in NASA and, people who are lobbyists. She seems to get along, and people are noticing that she is that way. And she kind of gets a tip from one of the men who are very, very important to the government. He's sort of the liaison between the let's say the president and NASA. Um, Now, unfortunately, something happens to him. It is in the season that something happens to him. They're heading to Korea. Am I correct? This is the right season, Julian?
Yeah. All this stuff sets up. This second season sets up all that stuff that Ellen finds herself moving up within at NASA, and kind of becomes the I can't remember what the name is, but she's basically the second in command of the guy who's the administrator for NASA. And yes, he's on the trip and he gets shot down off Sakhalin Island by the Russians. This has actually happened. The plane, I remember that. I remember seeing a movie that kind of illustrated what they think happened. The Air Force used to fly Boeing planes through there that would try and monitor the the electronic intelligence, and the Russians were getting kind of leery about it, and they'd warned us off several times. And this Korean plane, passenger plane, had an issue with its navigation and strayed too close, and was basically, for what the Russians thought, they thought it was that same American plane straying back in to the area to spy on them, and since they'd already warned them away, they decided to shoot it down.
And certainly this was equally confusing and damaging. And this is right at the point where, in a very unusual chain of events, we see three astronauts who, from the previous Jamestown mission, find themselves in space again, with Poole requesting to be sent back into space. And then all of a sudden we see Gordo as well is returning to space. Funny enough, at the same time, his ex-wife is returning to space, which creates tension with Ed, who also returns to space. My goodness, Julian. The same gentleman who unfortunately gets killed on the flight says, I don't know what this is, this nepotism or ism, whatever ism this is. It's almost as if they were called back to space. But, Ed was kind of in a very awkward position because he felt like this was time for them to go back. I mean, I personally thought it was fantastic when Poole talked about how she wanted to be the first, commander. And I think it was such a win for her to be the person who gets to be the person who is in that mission with the Russians, the handshake mission. And when she executes it, when it happens and they tell her, no, we don't want you to do it, she says, no, we're going to do this. When she does that, and Ellen gets the call from the president, and he says, whoever does his voice does it so well, because he says, I loved it, Nancy did too. And I'm like, this is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan right here, But it's great to hear him say Nancy loved it too, because you just know she was so involved in his presidency, almost like a vice president would be involved in the presidency. Their marriage was so strong, and she had such a huge presence with her husband during his 4 years. But I just loved how they really, I really believed, I said, this is him, and it felt good. Now, I think it's interesting that would be so pleasurable to hear, but certainly it created this diplomacy that was needed at that moment, didn't it, Julian?
Yes, because I think that ties in also at the same time. The reason that they were getting the wave off was because the tension on the moon was growing huge. We had the Marines up there. They'd been sent up with modified firearms that they'd be able to use to defend the crater, and they end up chasing the Russians that are there off, and then when they decide they're going to keep a detachment of 2 Marines out there constantly, and eventually the Russians send a group out again to see what's going on, and I think we're in the same portion.
Yes.
There's a discharge of firearms. The Americans fire on the Russians. They end up killing one. They do, haul them back to Jamestown, and there's a great fuss over. They managed to save the other one, and then of course the Russians are like, we want our guy back. So tensions get really, really, really bad.
They do get really bad, and while the Marines do handle an incredible load and sacrifices, many of them, I think, get killed in that altercation that you were talking about, Julian, we also see some incredible acts of heroism as, Gordo is up there in Jamestown at the same time that his ex-wife is there, and they're in a different section of Jamestown, the post. And ironically, while all this is going on, while this altercation between the Marines, our American Marines, and these other Russian fighters as well, there's an additional problem. It's a reactor problem, and all of a sudden this turns like it feels very 3 Mile Island-ish, Julian.
Yeah.
But in space on the moon, and certainly if the problem isn't corrected, there's going to be, it's going to be a nuclear explosion on the moon. And the only 2 people who they really have contact with, because Gordo was, there on the original Jamestown, and he knew that they could communicate through this, this old school communicator. I guess that's what I would call it.
Yeah.
He hooks it up.
Yeah.
Alita finds it. She comes out of the woodwork after what might be 10 years. She's grown up and needs a job, and she gets thrown a bone by Margot, but there's still a little bit odd tension between them.
Yeah.
Because Alita, she's a little rough. She's not playing the game. I wonder if they really have that conversation off screen, but it's funny that Margot and Alita had that problem. But Margot learned to tame it and be cordial, and one hand washes the other. I think Alita is going to learn that maybe at some point. But it was very interesting. In a moment, this is actually a scene that I was talking to you about last week, and how honestly it's just so shocking that these 2 astronauts would even do this. Gordo, and what is the woman's name? Is it
Tracy? Yes.
They decide to save the day, but it's at such a great risk. Once again, and it's actually quite shocking, Julian, because I think everybody knows that if you run out into this, the vacuum of space, and you're not properly protected, you're almost assuredly going to not make it. They tell them they have 15 seconds, and it seems like an impossible feat, but they don't even hesitate, right, Julian?
Right. I think what also it adds to kind of the pathos of this scene, of these actions, is that, in between the seasons, we find out that, tensions between Gordo and Tracy are such that she's divorced him. She's now gonna get married to this. I never did find out what he actually was, but he's some sort of, high muckety muck, entrepreneur or something like that. That she's living kind of like this life of Riley, where she's hardly doing astronaut stuff anymore, because she's more of a propaganda piece for NASA. But
yeah, she's like a trophy astronaut.
Yeah, a trophy astronaut. But she's still somewhat on the rotation for doing stuff. And then, Gordo is getting, he realizes he's let himself go. He's living off of his stories of being up on the moon and all that for that first, time, and realizes he has no self-worth anymore. He's got to get himself going. So he finds himself back up on the moon with Tracy, and he's makes it clear that he's going to try and win her back.
Yeah.
And so, she, we get established that, her smoking is important to her, and she's not supposed to be smoking up on the station, but she finds a way to subvert the smoke detectors, goes in and finds in the airlock a way to smoke, and he finds out about it. And so that's why they happen to be in that one portion of the modules when all hell breaks loose. Nobody knows they're there. They're stuck. But there's no suits in there with them, so they can't do anything. So, yeah, you start getting the feeling that she likes seeing the old Gordo again, and that there could be perhaps some hope for them to rekindle that romance. But of course, all this stuff happens, and then they find out that the gunfire has damaged the actual, the mechanism which is supposed to regulate some of the cooling, and it's going to overheat. And so they're going to have like a meltdown, and it's all because of the unknown. There was another module, another reactor that was put, and most of the astronauts didn't know it was there, and that's what has caused the problem. So yes, they have to switch a relay for power so that they can get the fans working again, or whatever they need to do for cooling, and they have to get outside to that other module, and yes, duct tape. And how long can you hold your breath? Because and actually it's not even holding your breath. You can't hold your breath or you're done. You have to expel as much air as you can and still operate. Because if you have any air in there, it's going to expand, and it's going to be done. So yeah, it's pretty unlikely that this would even work as long as it does for this. It's obvious that they know it's a one-way ticket. They figure they're both going to be dead before they even get back, or at least one of them is. But he decides he's going to go do it, and she says, "Bullshit, we're both going to do it." So they do, and luckily both of them do it. But then by the time they get back, it's too late. They die basically cradling each other.
Yeah, it really was a humbling scene. Once the station, let's say, was back under U.S. control, it was quite a humbling scene, and certainly something that I wasn't prepared. I didn't know that was going to happen. Here they have some people. It even inspired, let's say, amateur enthusiasts to make For All Mankind duct tape spacesuits. Like this is, the imagination of it all for something that was incredibly dangerous. And I'm sure a lot of people probably dressed up like this in Halloween too, but last year. But it's just so remarkable that they would even attempt to do this with knowing that it was something that they weren't going to come back from. So the fact that they were doing that. And I think that what was interesting was that, he did want to win her back. And certainly I think that although they had their differences, this was something that they both agreed that they would be willing to do. So none of anything else mattered when it came to this. Your decision is, we don't do this and everybody dies, or we sacrifice ourselves and we can become and save people who don't deserve to die anyway, not like they did. But certainly was something I think a lot of these astronauts wouldn't even hesitate to make this decision. I'm just so glad that they were in this section, Julian. And the way she kind of did this cigarette thing, it was very kind of, you're in high school and you have to go in the bathroom to smoke and you have to open up the window and kind of blow the smoke out of the window kind of thing. It was very funny in that regard. However, who knows, maybe that act is what saved, that, because she found that she could go in that room and do that. But yeah, certainly this was one of the most unexpected scenes I felt, Julian. I wasn't expecting anyone to do that, but even, this was something that I think I almost wondered whether anybody would know or whether it would be kept secret, because how would you, I don't know whether they would want anyone to know that particular reactor was up there and not installed correctly, and that's why they did it. So I wasn't quite sure. Eventually they get a statue built for them. I wasn't quite sure whether the statue said yes because they saved everybody, but they didn't specify how they saved everyone. Maybe they said, oh, they had to plug in something or something would explode, but perhaps they didn't say it was a reactor. I don't remember, but if they snuck something up there, then it doesn't necessarily look like the administration is doing the right thing. I mean,
well, they were, if I remember correctly, even though the reason was because of the other, and it's not because it was incorrectly installed, it's because it was secret and nobody knew it was there that needed to know. And so when shit happened, they didn't realize that what would have been damaged, because they were like, there shouldn't be anything there to get damaged, right? So they played it off as fixing the issue with the known reactor. And
okay.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, they played it off as if we took care of an issue with the reactor that we knew was there. So that's how they were able to, because those statues, they're in the duct tape and everything. So yeah, they just played it off as if it was an issue with the first reactor, and it wasn't because something happened that tripped the second reactor that nobody knew about, because they didn't want that to get out.
Absolutely. And certainly, as we said, things are resolved in the sense of this mission where Poole ends up shaking hands, and we have that heartfelt comment by the president, along with the, let's say, we are able to defend our land rights on the moon, if that's what you want to call it. And of course, Gordo and his wife saving the day, ex-wife. So I think it's very interesting. Those three arcs seem to play out that way, with Ellen even higher up in the ranks than she was before, and Alita kind of redeeming herself a bit. She says something to one of the mission support specialists that was way out of line, and makes a friend. But I hope she ends up toning down some of those zingers. I'm going to call them zingers, Julian.
Yeah.
Zingers, right? The only person who seems to like them is Molly, who I think at some point, I don't remember if it was this season or the next season, where Alita, somebody says, oh no, she apologizes. She's like, I'm not apologizing. And he's like, yes, you are. And so then she walks away and gives him the bird. And Molly goes, I like that girl. I'm like, of course, the one person who would like her would be Molly. It was like such a miracle to hear anybody say that they liked her. However, I think it is funny, the personalities that we're seeing. And I'm glad they didn't make Alita sort of like this little goody two shoes where she just does what she's told. And, everything, aren't you lucky to be where you are kind of thing. She feels very, like as if she doesn't want things to be charity towards her, but she's earned her position. I think even after coming back, she needed that job. Do you think that Margot felt guilty about Alita? Or, I don't think Margot was responsible, but she wanted to live with Alita. And as you said, Julian, Margot's living there at Mission Command.
Yeah, I understand Margot's her hesitancy to take in this young girl at the time when she comes to her. This is, when she and her husband, her dad are you know, they've got to get out because they're illegals. And she's hoping that she can stay, you know, with Margot. And this is still at a young formative point. She really, Margot should have taken her in. I understand her hesitancy to suddenly find herself having to be a mother, essentially, for this young girl, but she's already extended herself to helping guide her and see her succeed. And at this moment when she needs her, she turns her back on her, essentially. And, you know, who is Alita if she ends up staying with Margot? Who is Margot if Alita ends up staying with her, right? I mean, lots of different things could have happened at that point, but they go, you know, it becomes a separate thing. And luckily, you know, Alita finds her way back into the system and back into NASA. But it's one of those what if type things. You know, one of the other things that's interesting about the, you know, you mentioned we have the successful handshake with the Soyuz Apollo meeting and all that, but when Poole and her, you know, partner were over in, you know, Star City for their training as part of this whole thing, they get kind of isolated because of the stuff that's going on, and some of the other things that are going on, I think. And I think this is when they finally managed to get some information from Margot regarding some of the engine schematics and things like that. And that's why they're able to get out of Russia. Poole is able to get back on and call them and get out of Russia because they finally managed to get some information from Margot and start that, you know, pathway of communication where she's slipping information to the Russians. So to try and keep, you know, I don't know. She thinks that, you know, if the science, you know, if scientists need to kind of, we're here to be peaceful, and she's, you know, thinking that she can kind of control, you know, what's happening. So, and they're kind of threatening, you know, it's like, yeah, we're having trouble with this, and we know you're not, and if you help us with this, we'll, you know, give you that type of a thing. It's quid pro quo. So
Yeah, and it certainly isn't sort of like an even exchange, and it's not ever going to be. This is a very dangerous situation for Margot, and I think Margot started suddenly starting to realize how bad this is going to get. I think she realizes she's definitely in over her head, but there's nothing she can do. She can't walk over to anybody and say, "This is what's happening to me." You know, this could be construed as an act of treason, even though they cornered her, even though she's literally in a room and they're surrounding her and they're going to kill this guy in front of her. You know, I do realize that, at least I think that they were essentially telling her that they were going to kill her too. So I think, you know, it was more than just saving his life. But you know something, Julian, this is unfortunately something that Margot has to go through. I don't think she told anybody about this. Do you?
no, she didn't tell anybody about it because she knows the moment that she tells somebody who needs to know, she's not going to be in that position where she's at anymore. She's going to be like, "You're out," you know, or they're going to try and play her to try and catch them, you know, and try and catch a Russian spy, you know. They might have tried to use, but first she'd be through the ringer, going, you know, what the hell did you give them? Probably even tried on, you know, for treason.
Absolutely. And Julian, as we're wrapping up the show tonight, the season does end right after that moment that you mentioned, with this incredible ending scene. And we zip up to 1995, Julian, where what clearly looks and clearly can be identified as an astronaut walking on Mars, Julian. And this really takes the cake, I think. What a way to end a season. Just a slam dunk of knowing that we're going to see, hopefully, astronauts on Mars. Julian, what did you think when you saw this scene?
Well, it was like kind of a logical progression. We've gotten to space, we got on the moon, and now we are heading to the next planet. And it just had me wondering, how are they going to approach it? How are they going to go about it? What kind of mechanism? Because we know that they've been trying to, stay within the bounds of plausibility of the different types of um, practical concerns that have been brought up about how we would go about getting there. And so I love that they're using what we know now, what we're working on now, as a springboard for how they're going to show this eventual race between private concerns, the U.S. and Russian race to get to Mars.
Yes. And it is fascinating because Julian and I are going to talk about this next week. Recap of For All Mankind season 3, which is going to focus quite a bit on this race for Mars. And it's just amazing. I loved the segue into this and the jump to 1995. Certainly, it is very interesting to see that. It's just absolutely wonderful seeing someone walking on that planet. So it's just so spectacular what they've done again, Julian, with this show to provide us with what I still feel would have been the natural progression of things if that type of investment and direction were allowed to continue. We might possibly have been on Mars in 95. So humans on Mars in 95. So Julian, did you enjoy season 2 as much as you enjoyed season 1?
I did. I really did. I think season 2 was the one that really kind of caught me, and I was like, I'm totally in now, totally in. So that's when I started binging it as much as I could, actually. So to get through it.
It certainly had a different feeling to it than season 1, which felt more experimental. Season 2 felt as if they had experience now, and now they have the tools to kind of break through, horizons they weren't even, or goals that they perhaps hadn't even set. For example, the handshake goal. It doesn't. Anybody can go in space and shake hands, but this meant something more than just the ability to fly 2 rockets into space. Clearly they were capable of doing this, but it had such a greater impact than just saying we're going to meet and shake hands. And I think that that type of effect that you can have, Reagan said it was beautiful, right? They said they thought it was beautiful as they watched it on TV. And certainly that's what people want to see. They want to be encouraged. They want to see these beautiful moments that I'm hoping to see more and more on this show. That sense of hope and pride in seeing, astronauts together. And, it is wonderful to see when we see that occurring in space. And certainly that does actually happen now. So we do see astronauts from different countries frequently going into space with one another, meeting up with one another, doing spacewalks and missions with one another. So it does happen. But it was quite amazing. You remember Poole had said, I need more. I need to show that I can be a commander in this. And it was interesting seeing Baldwin go there and say, look, guess what? Yeah, it's time. We need to do what we promised we said we were going to do. And it was great to see that kind of response. But the final thing that I am going to say is that Baldwin also put himself in a very unique position. He's going to be heading up this Pathfinder mission, Julian. And he calls it America's next level space shuttle mission, or like the slogan for it. He keeps saying it over and over again in season 3, and I'm like, yeah, this seems amazing. America's next level space shuttle. Like it was just such a cool way he described it. And certainly season 3 doesn't disappoint, but we're going to do season 3 next week. Julian, any final words about this incredible season 2 of For All Mankind?
No, just only that it just kept on getting better and better as every show came along, which is certainly what you hope for with a well-written, well-run series. You want to be just eager for that next episode and wondering how are they going to get out of this situation and what's going to happen here. So yeah, that was did in this season did they start the whole thing with Ed's wife and
yes.
Yeah. That was the one thing I really didn't like about the whole season. Was when she involved with the young man there, who was the friend of the family.
Well, things do happen, Julian.
I know, but it was so completely. It was like, oh, that's so bad, so bad.
This program, this series is not devoid of sex of any kind. So we do see intimate relationships, and whether they're with strangers or with people they care about, we do see that in the show, and it exists. So they are at least acknowledging that, however disappointing the interactions may be. So, it's something that happened, and I don't know whether it would have gone that far. However, I think that it is very interesting what it turns into, and we're going to see that in season 3, Julian. I think certainly there is going to be this very interesting development when things are kind of not completely cut off or, allowed to fester. What can happen to that person? And I think that that's also, in my opinion, part of why he does have sort of a fall, if you will, in his performance. So that's just my theory. You and I are going to talk about that next week, Julian. The impact that this has had on this poor fellow and his career, and space jail, if you will, if we want, or space exile, whatever you want to call it, for season 3. But Julian, thank you so much for joining me tonight to talk about season 2 for All Mankind, which has just been so wonderful to watch. Julian, where can people find you?
They can find me on Facebook and Instagram. There I am.
Exactly. And guys, of course, you can find me on Positive Fandom. You can also find me on the Burn Network. Please do check out Julian and I. As I said, we've reviewed seasons 1 and 2. 2 we did tonight. 3 we're going to be doing next week. And of course, we're going to be following every episode of For All Mankind when the season starts on November 10th, right here. Have no fear, we're going to be reviewing those. I'm so excited for this next season, and I'm excited to talk about season 3, which really does go to a place, I guess, in a sense, we haven't gone. The Rovers have gone there, but we have not. So it's just absolutely fascinating, guys. You do want to, please, if you can, check out For All Mankind seasons 1, 2, and 3. You can still check them out in enough time before season 4 starts. So please do that. I'd also want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson, who's our moderator, collaborator, and good friend, for, as usual, being there. We are all good people. Tom Jr. Jackson, thanks so much for your support. And guys out there, everybody who watched tonight and on the replay, thank you for doing that. And everybody, always remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.